Good morning, everyone. Dr. Alex Vasquez here, and today is Sunday, November 29th of 2020. We are going to take a look right now at this press release from the UK government, just released yesterday on the 28th of November 2020, from the Department of Health and Social Care, at-risk groups to receive free winter supply of vitamin D. So I have not read this press release, and usually when I do my videos, I'm all prepared and I've got slides and I've got maps and graphs and all that. This is going to be totally spontaneous, and obviously this isn't the format that I usually use. So you can either watch it or not, but what I want to do right now is take a really quick and spontaneous look and then an analysis of what I expect is probably going to be one of the dumbest documents I've ever read. But I also want to say at least they're doing something. At least they're doing something. So let's just go. Like I said, I haven't read this yet, but let's just go through it. At-risk groups to receive free winter supply of vitamin D. 2.7 million vulnerable individuals in England to be offered free winter supply of vitamin D by the government. Okay, let's see how valid that really is. Deliveries will be made to clinically extremely vulnerable and care home residents, higher risk of vitamin D deficiency, as these groups have spent more time indoors this year. Well, everybody has spent more time indoors this year. So if you want to talk about who's at risk for vitamin D deficiency, which is one of the main risk factors for COVID infection and complications, including death, that includes everybody, because everyone's been on lockdown now for almost a year. And for example, in Europe, the salvation of Europe on a yearly basis is the fact that people get a month-long vacation in August and they go to the beach and they are able to replenish their vitamin D stores. If it weren't for that vacation, everyone would be completely depleted, as they usually are. So this year, in 2020, no one got their vacation, spending a month on the Mediterranean coast. So the level of deficiency that we're about to see going into 2021, vitamin D deficiency peaks typically in February and March. That's because people are usually on the borderline of depletion anyway. They get a little bit of a boost in August, and then they're deficient 6 months later. Extremely deficient, I should say, 6 months later. They're almost always deficient. So what we're going to see in 2021 is a catastrophe of complications related directly to vitamin D deficiency. What would those be? Spontaneous death, increased mortality from all causes, but especially depression and especially infectious diseases. So, more than 2.5 million vulnerable people across England will be offered free vitamin D supplements for the winter. The government announced today, 2.5 million. Well, why 2.5 million? What about the other tens of millions of people who need vitamin D? So, quantitatively, in terms of the population that they're supposedly providing this free service to, it's already insufficient. All care homes will automatically receive a provision for their residents, while individuals on the clinically extremely vulnerable list will receive a letter inviting them to opt in for supply to be delivered directly to their homes. Deliveries will be free of charge starting in January, and will provide 4 months worth of supplements to last people throughout the winter months. Well, this was announced in November. First of all, this should have been done for decades. We've known for decades that people are vitamin D deficient. We've known for decades that the deficiency peaks in February and March. That's what the drug companies call cold and flu season. So why are they doing it they're doing it in January? They should be doing it now. Here's the other thing. This is from the UK. In 2017, the British Medical Journal published a meta-analysis showing that vitamin D could help prevent respiratory infections. And now we're faced with this so-called pandemic of a respiratory infection, but we already had the data from 2017, a meta-analysis. That's like a compilation of lots of studies that are looked at kind of as a group. We've known now for 3 years that vitamin D, via a meta-analysis published no less in the British Medical Journal, that vitamin D can prevent these respiratory infections, help prevent. That's a big conversation, but let's just go with it. That was their conclusion. So why weren't governments giving out vitamin D already, regardless of coronavirus infection? But then when this so-called pandemic hit in early this year in February and March, why weren't governments like, boom, we got the answer to this, we know how to handle it, we already have the meta-analysis, let's go with the data. And so now they've got a mountain of data, and what are they doing? They're going to wait another month? This should have been done 16 years ago when I first published a review article on vitamin D. At that time, 16 years ago in 2004, we already knew the importance of vitamin D. We already knew that these populations were deficient. I said then, as the lead author on that paper, I said, we've got to act on this, otherwise we are inviting catastrophe. And here we are with the catastrophe. The supplements will support general health, in particular bone and muscle health. That's a stupid comment. What they're trying to avoid is saying that vitamin D actually supports immune function and reduces inflammation and protects against viral infection. They're trying to avoid saying that, at least in that sentence. In particular, bone and muscle health, that's like a paradigm from 30 years ago. Like we're done with that. Nobody can think that vitamin D only functions for bone and muscles at this point. Like you can't think that. If you're older than 15 years old, if you're an adult and you're attempting to be aware of the function of vitamin D, you have to know that it's more than just calcium and bones. This is particularly important this year as these individuals are more likely to have been indoors for extended periods of time. Yeah, no, they weren't passively indoors. They were forced to stay in their homes. Extended periods due to measures introduced to stop the spread of COVID. Well, hey, you know what we could have done to stop the spread of COVID? We could have given people vitamin D, because now, in a recent clinical trial, also published by a journal published by the British Medical Journal, they showed that vitamin D administration reduces the viral load of coronavirus in patients who have this coronavirus infection. So if you wanted to limit the spread of coronavirus, vitamin D is the way. Lockdowns could be a way, but they don't need to be the way. I haven't had breakfast, by the way, and I am still actually on my second cup of coffee, so give me a second here. Evidence of the link of vitamin D to COVID-19 is still being researched, with larger scale trials needed. They always say that when they don't want to take action on available data. We've had articles for decades showing that vitamin D supports immune function. We had a meta-analysis published in the British Medical Journal showing that vitamin D prevents respiratory infections. And now they're saying they need more data. They always say they need more data when they don't want to take action on the data they already have. In the meantime, Secretary of State has asked National Institute of Health and Care Excellence, give me a break, nothing excellent happening here, and Public Health England to re-review existing evidence. Re-review? You just had a meta-analysis 3 years ago. The government will publish its findings towards the end of the year. So what? Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, Matt Hancock said, quote, "Because of the incredible sacrifices made by the British people to control the virus, many of us have spent more time indoors this year and could be deficient in vitamin D." No, you were already deficient in vitamin D before this problem even started. So let's look at that data. The prevalence of vitamin D deficiency in the winter in Great Britain is 87%. That's before lockdowns. 87%. So I'm quoting this article from 2001. Let me make sure this is correct. No, I'm sorry, 2014. Journal of Steroid Biochemistry and Molecular Biology, October 2014. So we knew 6 years ago that the British people, just using them as an example, 87% of them were deficient in vitamin D already in the winter. And now they're saying they still have to look at it? 87%. I want to make sure I'm saying that correctly. I don't like this graph that I'm going to show you, but it's the graph that we're going with. In Spain, 34% are below 20 nanograms per milliliter. That's not deficiency, that's depletion, that's zero. So if you've got 50 cents in your bank account, I don't know, is insufficient. It's like that's like having nothing, right? So when the researchers define depletion as deficiency, they're already understating the problem. Everybody can think about that, but that's what I'm trying to say. I obviously haven't had breakfast yet. In the United States, up to 37% are below 20 nanograms per milliliter. That's overt deficiency. What happens? Heart attack, stroke, cancer, infections, and depression, and muscle pain. Those are the manifestations of vitamin D deficiency. Muscle pain, muscle weakness, increased risk for all-cause mortality, including heart attack, stroke, cancer, and infectious disease, and if I didn't already say it, depression. So let's go back, see if I can actually make it through this document without waking up the neighbors. All right, could be deficient in vitamin D. The government is taking action to ensure that vulnerable individuals, which is everybody, it's not simply 2.5 million, access a free supply to last them through the darker winter months. This will, sorry, I'm getting messages here. This will support their general health, keep their bones and muscles healthy. That's such a stupid statement. And critically reduce the pressure on our in National Health Service, NHS. I'm gonna, if they say bones and muscles one more time, I'm gonna get upset. A number of studies indicate that vitamin D might have a positive impact protecting against COVID-19. I have asked NICE and PHE to re-review the existing evidence. Stupid. You already have the evidence on the link between COVID-19 and vitamin D to ensure we explore every potential opportunity to beat this virus. It should have been taken action 10 months ago. Dr. Alison Tedstone, chief nutritionist at Public Health England, said, vitamin D is important for our bone and muscle health. Babies. We advise that everyone, particularly the elderly, who don't get outside and those with dark skin, takes a vitamin D supplement containing 10 micrograms. Okay, so here we go. 10 micrograms, which is 400 international units every day. That is not enough for a baby. 400 international units is insufficient for an infant. The appropriate physiologic dose for adults is approximately 4,000 units, not 400. A very reasonable dose for infants is 2,000 units, according to an article published in The Lancet, I believe in 2001. That was a study that involved more than 10,000 infants. So you cannot tell me that the group wasn't big enough to get statistical significance. 10,000 infants. were treated with 2,000 international units of vitamin D. So if 10,000 infants can get 2,000 international units, we've proven that that dose is safe. Later in 2003, Robert Heaney published the appropriate dose for adults, which is approximately 4,000, sometimes up to 10,000 per day, depending on absorption efficiency and body size and all that. 400 is insufficient, and yes, it's better than nothing. But it's close to nothing. It's 10% of what these people need on a daily basis, right? So the government is applauding itself for giving people 10% of what they should have received 16 years ago. This year, the advice is more important than ever, with more people spending more time inside, which is why the government will be helping. Oh, you're helping. You're helping 16 years late with 10% of what you should be providing. We'll be helping the clinically extremely vulnerable to get vitamin D. This is almost finished. We're at the last couple of paragraphs here. The advice from Public Health England, PHE, is for everybody to take 400 international units or 10 micrograms of vitamin D a day between October and early March to keep bones and muscles healthy. This is just idiocy. Bones and muscles. Really? Vitamin D does more than help your bones and muscles. It has an anti-inflammatory effect throughout your whole body, including your brain, which is part of the way that vitamin D has an antidepressant effect. It also reduces inflammation throughout your whole body so that when you get sick, you don't have such an exaggerated inflammatory response, otherwise known as cytokine storm, which is what kills patients who have this COVID thing. It also helps protect against acute respiratory distress syndrome, which is another cause of death in these people who have COVID and other viral infections. Okay. Public Health England advises people who are more at risk of not having enough vitamin D to take a vitamin D supplement all year round. Duh. A range of products and doses are available at supermarkets, pharmacies, and other retailers. Anyone who is able to purchase vitamin D supplements, start taking them now is advised to do so. That would be everybody, even if you are also eligible for free delivery later in the year. Department of Health and Social Care will provide further information and guidance for all nursing and residential care home providers in the coming weeks. End of document. End of one of the dumbest documents I've read in my adult life. This is available at the UK government website, gov.uk/government/at-risk-groups-2-receive-free-winter-supply-of vitamin-D, otherwise known as at-risk groups to receive free winter supply of vitamin D. Every word has a dash between it. That's appalling. That's appalling. That's an embarrassment to any professional level person who has a role in healthcare. To any and all doctors should read this and just be screaming that this is stupid, because it is stupid. And if you're a doctor, that means you have responsibility to know things. And by now, you should know what the appropriate dose of vitamin D is if you're a doctor. If you're a doctor and you think 400 international units is appropriate for adults, then you're a clueless, ignorant doctor. And you're 17 years behind the times, because Robert Heaney already published the first clinical trial in 2003 in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, which any fool could get online for free if they even asked themselves a question. So let's say you didn't know anything about vitamin D, and You wake up one day and you say, man, I want to know what the appropriate dose of vitamin D is. Not government propaganda, but I'm actually going to look at the research. You would hopefully find Robert Heaney's article, because it was the first article to actually investigate the appropriate dose of vitamin D. And they came to the conclusion that the physiologic dose for adults is between 3,000 and 5,000 international units, not 400. So, vitamin D deficiency affects every population worldwide, but especially in the farther we get away from the equator. That's the center of the planet. That's the part that's closest to the sun. So the rays are stronger there. So the farther away you get from the equator, the less strong those rays are to create vitamin D on your skin. And regardless of that, if you wear long sleeve shirts and you're indoors, it doesn't matter how strong the sun is outside, because you ain't getting it if you're inside. And glass typically filters ultraviolet rays. So, what else do I want to say about this? Probably nothing more. If you can hear what I'm saying, you're probably deficient in vitamin D, right? So I'm speaking English. Yo podía hablar en otros idiomas si tú quieres escuchar otros idiomas, pero en este momento estoy hablando en inglés. So right now I'm speaking English, which means we're talking about the UK, for example. If you're in the UK, Great Britain, England, Wales, Ireland, Scotland, you are probably deficient in vitamin D. If you speak English, you're probably deficient in vitamin D. Same thing is true of the United States and Canada. Obviously, even worse because it's farther north, right? If you're farther north from the fat part of the planet that's closer to the sun, you're getting less vitamin D. People who live in equatorial latitudes, that's the part that's closer to the sun, where the sun's rays are stronger. They have less vitamin D deficiency, but they can still be vitamin D deficient because maybe they put a shirt on to protect themselves from the sun's rays, and they remain vitamin D deficient. So, yes, risk increases with being farther away from the equator, but it doesn't tell you much. For example, one of my favorite cities, Bogota, Colombia, Colombia is on the equator, but Bogota is cold. It's in the mountains, and people in Bogota are pretty formal, so they almost always wear long sleeve shirts and a suit if they can. But because of the cold and the clouds and the formality of culture in Bogota, people are vitamin D deficient, right? And they work. Plus they simply work. People in Colombia typically work 6 days a week. They get one day off, Sunday, but not always. And in Bogota, for example, that's the day that people go out and ride their bikes. And they might get a little sun, but they all want to look like they're athletic, so they put on jumpsuits, that have, American brands. So my point is this: a person can live in an equatorial zone and still be vitamin D deficient because of lifestyle and cold. Just because a city is on the equator doesn't mean it's sunny and hot. Typical, temperature in Bogota is like 15 degrees Celsius or 55 degrees Fahrenheit, or 60s. It's usually pretty cool. So my point is, the only way to know a person's vitamin D status is to test their vitamin D status. Anybody who thinks 20 nanograms per milliliter is sufficient doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. It has to be at least 32 nanograms per milliliter in order to begin to normalize or suppress physiologic compensatory mechanisms. Specifically, I'm talking about parathyroid hormone. So if if anyone is below 32 nanograms per milliliter, they are in a state of physiological compensation for their vitamin D deficiency. Between 30 and 40 is where we start to see things become more normal. Mortality is still high, higher than it should be, at anything below 40. So you really have to be above 40 nanograms per milliliter in order to kind of be physiologically normal. You have to be at least 40. In the article that I published in 2004, I said you need to be at least 45. Now I think you need to be at least 50. I think that's totally reasonable. People who spend time outdoors, like lifeguards and farmers and rural Africans, typically have a vitamin D level between 50 and 90 nanograms per milliliter. Above that, we could say it's supraphysiologic, but that doesn't mean it's toxic. So I recently published a review, I published it myself, stating that I think the optimal level should be between 50 and 90 nanograms per milliliter. That's the physiologic range. So you can't say that that's toxic. You can't say it's too much because it's not. Toxicity of vitamin D typically starts around 150 nanograms per milliliter. So I'm saying that people should be between 50 and 90. That's far below 150. So typically, to get to 50 to 90, a person would have to take at least 4,000, more like 10,000 international units, probably more like 15,000. That would probably be appropriate. So what's the physiologic correlate with 15,000 international units of vitamin D? That's equal to about 15 minutes of sunshine. So if you think that 15 minutes of sunshine is reasonable, that 15 minutes would give you approximately 15,000 international units. That would put you in the optimal range, most likely. To get to higher levels, again, 20,000 international units is not unreasonable, but it's starting to make me want to get a lab test to make sure everything's okay. At 50,000 units, a good proportion of people will become toxic at 50,000 units. So 50,000 is probably too much. 20,000 might be too much for long-term use, and in normal-sized people, maybe an obese person would need more, just because they have more tissue to distribute. 10,000, totally reasonable for most people. 4,000, totally reasonable, maybe even a little bit too low. 400 is completely stupid. That dose is too low. Will it help people? Yeah, it will. It will help people. You're giving them 10% of what they need. You're not a hero. You're keeping them deficient. Anybody who endorses 400 international units for adults is keeping them deficient. So you can look at a program like this and say, oh man, they're just so generous. That's the cutting edge. You see that? They're way ahead of it. In fact, they need more research. You could say that if you're clueless. Or you could say, this is a program designed to fail because it's not going to help people sufficiently. It will help people. But the other thing that could happen here, either they will help people a little, or they won't help people, and then they'll say, look, vitamin D doesn't work. That's called designing a system to fail, and it happens quite commonly in politics and in medical research. Studies, and this will eventually get published, right? They'll publish the outcomes of this intervention, and they'll say, man, vitamin D just we spent all this money on vitamin D and it didn't even work. Well, yeah, it's because you used 10% of what you should use. Or they'll say, it didn't work at all. And then they'll say vitamins don't work. So that's the situation. I'll put some articles and hyperlinks in the bottom of this video, wherever I end up putting this video. Obviously, this is not health advice for individuals. This is just for educational and hopefully entertainment purposes. So take a look at my other information on vitamin D. I've published lots of articles on it, reasonably a lot of articles, a few. The monograph that I published was in 2004, Alternative Therapies in Health and Medicine. You can get that on the internet for free. You can get it from my website for free at inflammationmastery.com, inflammationmastery.com/D. Go there and you can download all my articles. I published this in the British Medical Journal. I believe, yeah, it was 2005. In 2005, I was invited by the editor to publish a letter stating that people need to consume, I don't recall exactly what we said, but I think it was between 2,000 or 3,000, up to 10,000 international units of vitamin D. The editor of the British Medical Journal invited me to publish that in his journal, or in their journal. I think it was Richard Smith at the time was the editor, but I could be wrong. So we said, or co-authored it with John Cannell, we said up to 10,000 international units. We said optimal serum vitamin D levels between 45 and 60. That's still reasonable. And again, we published that at the invitation of the British Medical Journal in, I believe it was May of 2005 in the British Medical Journal. You can look at that. You can look at my comments online at the British Medical Journal website from 2019. I've saved those as a PDF document. You can get those from my website. Again, inflammationmastery.com/D. It's a lowercase d, not a uppercase, lowercase d. And that you can see my videos there. You can download my research articles. You can see what the optimal range is. I just put that on the website yesterday. So I'm going to go have breakfast. Thank you for your attention. This has been Dr. Alex Vasquez, more affectionately known as Dr. V. Thank you much.